back to China in the 70s. It's very fascinating, and I went down a rabbit hole and watched a documentary that actually was good for information, but was kind of like an abuser sympathizer. Kind of, it was like a little sympathizy. I don't like it.
Speaking of, can I plug a podcast I just started listening to?
Yes, absolutely.
It's called Sold in America. I think I told you about it.
Mm-hmm. Really, I haven't listened, though.
Really good.
Okay.
I won't, look it up. It'll tell you what it's about, but, it's about sex trafficking and stuff. But I really like it because in the first episode, she's like, I want you to take all of your preconceived notions about sex work and all these different things and throw them out the window.
Yeah, get them out of there.
And I was like, well, I'm pretty liberal, like,
yeah.
If you want, whatever, and I'm pretty open to things. But shit, she's made me open my eyes. And I've been, like, even I had some, like, preconceived things that I didn't realize I had until she was talking about things, and I was like, whoa, I never thought of it that way. Like,
that's how we learn and grow, though.
Yeah.
Like, we realize, that was something I was holding deep that isn't true, and it was a narrative I was given.
So it's really good. I'm only 2 episodes in.
We're glowing up over here.
But I do like it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. Okay, so that is what mine is about, sex trafficking. Okay, so my sources are an article by Melissa Chi and Equan Ravai Desmond for Channel New Asia, guff.com, an article by M. Nguyen for Vietnam Breaking News, an article by Ryan Davis for Ranker, an article by Hwang Han for V Express, BlueDragon.org, and an episode of Insight.
BlueDragon.org is my website.
Is it? Or an episode of Insight. It was episode 13. Episode 13 of Insight for Channel New Asia. Okay, so in 1976, in Hanoi, Vietnam, a baby girl named Nguyen Van Tang was born. And I'm not sure why, but in all the articles I read, Nguyen's her last name, but it was put first. So I don't know like what's typical for names in Vietnam. If anyone knows, they can let us know.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know.
But people call her Van, but it's listed as Nguyen Van Tang. So I'm going to call her Van from now on out.
Okay.
Hanoi is the capital of Vietnam and has rich Vietnamese culture, stunning temples, bustling narrow streets that are decorated by like ancient architecture. Mm-hmm. My God, I can't talk today. Architecture. Vietnam is kind of shaped like a thin S shape. Okay. And Hanoi sits right in the top of the S curve. So it's like a skinny little snake, and Hanoi is right at the north in the middle.
I think it's funny that you're having trouble pronouncing words while wearing a shirt that says professional.
I'm professional. So Hanoi is not far from the northern border, which is the border of China and Vietnam. Mm-hmm. So Van grew up in the city of Hanoi with her mom and dad, and Van was a really beautiful young girl who ended up starting puberty a little earlier than other girls her age and in her grade, which resulted in a lot of attention from classmates, whether it was wanted or unwanted.
Me too,
particularly
girl.
Boys.
Yeah.
My sister was that way. I wasn't a late developer, but I'm not that curvy of a person.
I had hips and boobs in 3rd grade. I think we've already talked about that. So I got attention that I did not want or understand in elementary school. Yeah, even from adult. Like it's just looking at the time, you're just like, you already feel uncomfortable because you're in elementary school. But looking back, I'm like, oh, fucking disgusting.
Yeah. You're like, this should not have been going on.
No.
So that was similar with Van. She got unwanted attention.
Yeah.
And some wanted attention, too. Like, she kind of flourished a little bit with, like, being flirty with boys. And...
Well, yeah. It feels good to be wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Even, and if you don't understand that it's inappropriate, it still feels good.
Yeah, you're like, ooh, people are looking at me.
Yeah.
So Van had a lot of friends and went out regularly with them as a teenage girl. So in 1992, Van was 16 years old, and she had lost track of time. She was staying out with her friends, and she stayed out past curfew with her friends. So Van realized, she's like, oh, shit, like, I went past my curfew. Mm-hmm. So she tried to, she ran home and tried to, sneak in and not get caught by her parents, only to discover that the front door of her house was locked. Oh. So her parents, as a punishment, were like, sorry, we've told you so many times, we're locking the door, and you don't get to come in tonight, kind of thing. So Van's parents didn't let her in at all. So she was like, well, shit, what do I do? So she hooked up with her friends again. She went back with her friends, and they all went to a nearby karaoke bar. She's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if it was legal at the time I don't know what the liquor laws are like in Vietnam, but at the time she could drink beer at the bar, and she was 16. So I don't know if it was because they were just allowing it to happen, or if because when you were 16 you could drink beer. I don't know why, but anyway, so she had some
Can someone look that up for us?
Yeah, thanks. I know that was my job, but I didn't do it. She was at the karaoke bar with her friends, and it was 3 girlfriends she was with.
Okay.
Van and her friends met a woman named Tan, and Tan coaxed her and her friends to go to a border city called Langson. And Tan took them to another karaoke bar in Langson, but they never made it home after they went to the karaoke bar. So Vuti Ha, which was Van's mom, woke up the next morning. I think she expected that Van would be like on the patio or maybe stayed with a girlfriend or something like that when she didn't let her come in for the night. But Van was nowhere to be found like all day, which was weird because Van wasn't irresponsible necessarily. She sometimes broke curfew, and she was popular and like outgoing, so sometimes she like was out too late and things like that. It wasn't like her to not check in.
The fucking guilt her parents must have felt.
Yeah, a ton. Like, it's talked about in articles. They felt horrible.
You would. Like, there's no other way you could feel.
It was meant to just be like, haha.
But everything's meant to be innocent until it's not, which is just
so
horrifying.
all day passed and still no Van. So the day passed by, and actually decades passed by, and Van never showed up for years and years and years and years. So
it just was cold. Like, they didn't know.
Yeah, they just had no leads at all, and 20 years went by. Like, she was just missing. So later we find out what happens because Van was discovered 21 years after she went missing. Wow. So I'll explain how that happened, but I'm going to say what happened to her when she went missing, since we know that information now. So she went to a karaoke bar. Her parents never saw her again for 20 years. Well, what happened at the karaoke bar, she woke up in the morning, and the last thing she remembered was having a beer in the karaoke bar.
Were her friends missing too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. I don't know if her friends were ever found, actually.
Okay, but the whole group of girls went missing.
Yes, the four of them did.
Okay.
So the last thing, she wakes up in a strange house, and the last thing she remembers when she wakes up is she had a beer in the karaoke bar in Langson. And she looks around when she wakes up, and her 3 girlfriends were sleeping next to her. And Tan, the woman she met, was there too. And so Tan woke all the girls up, and she told the girls that they were in a house in China, and they were all going to get married to Chinese men.
You know, this happened, they talk about this in the podcast, which is crazy because I wanted to mention it this episode. And even when you think about, like, Jeffrey Epstein, the big trafficking case right now, there's almost always a woman involved whose job it is to go around. Like, that is in almost every sex trafficking case I've heard.
And I'll talk about that in a minute, too. Okay. So I'm going to pause right now. So they were all told they were going to get married to Chinese men. I'm going to talk about trafficking and the border of Vietnam and China.
Okay.
And, like, why that is a thing. So I watched an episode of Insight from Channel New Asia, episode 13, and it was called Vietnam's Trafficked Brides. So it had a lot of good information, but like I said earlier, there was some like abuser sympathizer kind of narration, so take all of this with a grain of salt too, because they essentially are like, well, it's because of this, so it's fine. Yeah. So there's a huge trafficking issue between Vietnam and China. There are a variety of trafficking routes that are normal in Vietnam into China in general. Vietnam's not the only place that China gets trafficked brides, but most of the brides in that area, I'm calling them brides, they're kidnapped people, get taken to China for specific reasons. Okay. So one of the most active and dangerous routes in Vietnam is a trail that leads all the way up through the S shape of Vietnam, through the city of Hanoi, which is where Van lived, and then up over the lush mountains of the northern border of Vietnam and into China. So women disappear all over Vietnam, but the further north you go, the more dangerous it becomes and the more likely you are to be a victim.
Because you're so close.
You're closer to China. It becomes more rural. There's a huge city, which it's easy to find people kidnapped in a huge city, but then it gets super rural. Yeah. So then it's also easy because there's no one.
So you find them in the city, but then you can get them out into rural areas really quickly.
Or you can kidnap someone in a rural area because there's usually a port. Yeah.
Or it's harder if you kidnap someone like way south. You have to bring them through the whole country and through a big city where you're more likely to get caught.
And then through the mountains again. So that area is particularly dangerous. So women are trafficked for 3 purposes in Vietnam, and it's always for profit. The operation is set up like so. So there's someone who wants something, so I'll talk about that in a second. Then there's a kidnapper who works essentially for profit, like Tan was a kidnapper. And then the top reason for trafficking is forced labor right now in Vietnam. But the other huge reason is forced prostitution and forced marriage, which sometimes go hand in hand because it's essentially, when it's a forced marriage, it's rape. Not all, we can't say all the time because maybe they fall in love and who the fuck knows? But for the most part, it's bad.
Yeah, it's not a consensual thing. No. The entire setup is not consensual.
Yeah, it didn't start from something consensual, no matter what. So kidnappers in the trafficking ring in Vietnam and China come in all shapes and sizes, like you were saying. They aren't just men, and they're usually not men. So they're older women. They're sometimes neighborhood friends. They're classmates. They're teenage girls. They're teenage boys. They're people you know.
I listened to a couple podcasts about Epstein, and it was the same. Like, he had a woman helping him, but they would coerce other teenagers to go get their friends. And these teenagers, even though they had been abused, were so brainwashed and kind of broken down that they'd go get their friend and bring them to Epstein's house. Like, all of these sex trafficking cases are so similar. It's fucking disgusting. Yeah, it's like humans have just figured out a way to make this work.
And in different countries, it ends up being the same sort. That's what works. Yeah. Usually the victims of trafficking are young women and girls ages like 13 to 30. 30 is a bit late. 13 is pretty typical.
But I guess it depends what you're using them for.
Yeah, it depends. And this sounds sad, but it depends on, like, if you're 30 and you look really young. Like, things, very superficial things like that. So there are a lot of reasons for the trafficking. Obviously, exploitation, profit, for things like this. But something happened in China in the 1970s that had an unexpected consequence that kind of made this worse. It definitely made this worse. And that was the one-child rule. So the one-child rule was created to help throttle China's rapidly growing out-of-control population, which actually did help. The country wouldn't be where it's at today if they hadn't done that, but from an economical standpoint, an industry standpoint. So in China, there's a social preference for men, and there just always has been. So now, 35 plus years later, China has around 14% more men than women, which naturally speaking, there's usually it's 51% women, about 49% men. There's for some reason there's just slightly more women in when you look at it like organically speaking. But there was a preference for men, so they would either give away the girls. Somehow the girls would accidentally die, like all these things when the girls were infants to try to get their one child to be a boy because there's a social preference for boys. And so now in the 70s and 80s, well, it's still happening, but like there's way more men than women. So the issue is the men have nobody to marry and partner with if they're hetero, marry, partner, and conceive their one child with. So the women have run out, essentially, for the men.
Well, I was going to say, right, like, I know there's a preference, but there's got to be some fucking women.
There are way more men, though. But yeah, exactly. Like, what were you thinking? Obviously, there has to be women.
Yeah.
So this has also made Chinese dowry prices go up. So in China, the man pays the dowry. Where in like some like when you hear about like, oh, the dowry, sometimes you think about like a Middle Eastern country where when the women's family gives a dowry to the male.
Essentially paying you to marry, to take my daughter. Okay.
So this is the opposite. The men pay the women's family a dowry to get the woman.
So you think women would be a hot commodity?
Yeah, you would think, wouldn't you?
Women are a hot commodity. We're the best. We're superior.
So the man pays the woman's family to marry her. And I don't know if this used to be different and if it changed because now women there are less of them. Like, I have no idea. But anyways, the dowry in China can be anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 to $60,000 USD, like US or more. And most people in China can't afford that.
Yeah, and that would make you rich over there.
Yeah. So men in China turn to Vietnam to find a wife. It's not far, similar culture, because the countries are right next to each other, so they're going to be a little similar. So men in China turn to Vietnam, and oftentimes they end up purchasing a trafficked bride. And that's much cheaper, sometimes $1,500 versus $50,000. But the other issue is that because of the dowry system, they don't always realize they're purchasing someone trafficked. They think they're paying a dowry to someone they have not met.
Oh, so
there is some miscommunication. These Chinese men usually don't realize that the women were kidnapped. They often think it's consensual.
Which is another way that it keeps going.
Yes.
Because I bet you could take 100 people and offer them to buy a bride. And maybe some would say yes, but I would hope most wouldn't. But if they don't know, most of them are going to say yes.
Yeah. And they're looking, usually when they buy the bride, or they think they're paying the dowry to get a bride, they're looking through a book and they pick someone, almost like a profile on Tinder. They're flipping through and they're like, oh, I think that this one looks
Oh my God, I never thought of Tinder like that.
Yeah,
I fucking shopped for men online.
You're shopping for the one that
But I'm not paying you guys shit. If you match with me on Tinder, you're not getting any money from me.
I'll buy you a beer, maybe.
No, you buy me. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I'll buy you a beer.
I'll buy you the second one.
I'll buy you a beer. So, that's all you're getting. I'm not paying them nothing shit.
So some Chinese men no, I'm sure. And then some say they don't. But, of course, we don't know whether they're just lying. Like, who knows? But anyways, so they're not necessarily purposefully buying people. But also, when I was thinking, at first I was like, that makes sense, poor men. But then I'm like, seriously, shame on you, though, because you have to know that that's happening. Yeah. There's no way you don't know. So why wouldn't you second guess and be like, wait, is this sketchy that I'm buying someone for $1,000?
Well, and it makes it really hard because here, if someone was buying someone, so many red flags would raise.
But we don't have dowries.
Right, that's what I'm saying. If in their culture they have dowries, it's just so, it's very interesting because it's such a different culture.
It gets more